Have you ever noticed how chaos always looks so far away until it's not? It's always somewhere else, another city, another state, or another zip code. You see it on your phone while you're sitting on the couch. Sirens in the background, storefront glass shattered, helicopters cutting circles in the sky. And you think to yourself, man, I'm glad that's not here. But unrest doesn't just teleport, it spreads. It starts downtown, then it moves to the shopping corridor, and then the gas stations start closing early. Then the traffic patterns start getting weird. Then the grocery store shuts its doors at 4 p.m. And suddenly, the helicopters aren't on your phone screen anymore. They're over your house. Civil unrest isn't about politics. It's not about hashtags. It's not about which side you're on. It's about what happens when large groups of emotional people collide with opportunity. Because when law enforcement gets stretched thin, when rumors move faster than facts, when adrenaline replaces reason, it doesn't take much for downtown to become 2 streets over. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men don't prepare for that moment. They prepare for fantasy, for zombies, for grid-down apocalypse, for cinematic firefights. But they don't prepare for the most likely scenario. A 3-night wave of unrest that locks down your neighborhood while you're trying to protect your wife, your kids, your home, your reputation. Because surviving unrest isn't about being the toughest guy on the block. It's about discipline. It's about visibility and communication and restraint. And knowing when to stand firm and knowing when to not step outside at all. You don't win civil unrest, you outlast it. And if it ever reaches your street, the loudest man on the block won't be the safest man on the block. The calmest man will be the winner. Today, we're talking about what actually happens when unrest spreads into residential neighborhoods, how it moves, how to recognize it early, how to harden your home without escalating the situation, and how to protect your family without becoming tomorrow's viral headline. This isn't fear, this is readiness. Now let's get into it.
All right, guys, ironically, just at the same time that we sat down to start recording this episode of the Tactical Redneck podcast, the news just broke in on the television and said that Mexico's on fire. Apparently, a cartel leader in Puerto Vallarta was taken out by Mexican federal law enforcement with the assistance of the United States. At least that's the storyline right now. And what's happened? There are cars burning everywhere in Mexico. Gunshots all over the place. Lots and lots of wounded, plenty of casualties. And it just underscores exactly what it is that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about civil unrest on your street and how to protect your home and your family. It just so happens that the timing of this situation in Puerto Vallarta just underscores exactly what we need to prepare for. I promise you, the people in Puerto Vallarta today did not expect to have cars burning on every street corner and to step out and listen to the sounds of gunshots off in the distance. But that's what they have. What we want to talk about is what you're going to do when something like that happens in your neighborhood. Now, this situation in Mexico is most likely going to calm down here within just a few days. Maybe it's going to take a week, maybe 10 days, and all of that's going to calm down. But what's going to happen is while it calms down in all of these primary vacation areas like Puerto Vallarta and some of the more hot destinations like that for travel and U.S. citizens, people from around the world go there and spend their tourist money. All of this fighting between the lieutenants who are left now are going to start fighting between themselves. That's going to move out into more of the rural areas. Now, the good news is we don't have anything like that going on in the United States right now, but imagine if you did live in Mexico and this is what's happened and the streets are taken over, there's cars burning, they do these cartel blockades is what that is. They want to limit the military movement in these areas, so they take these cars, roll them out into the middle of these primary streets and passageways, light them on fire. And the cartels do that in order to keep the military from being able to move around as well and get their military vehicles into these areas to fight with the cartels. So if you lived in Mexico, you would have these cartel blockades going on, you would have fighting in the streets, fire everywhere, major disruption of services. And then you would have to figure out how to survive in that situation. Now, while that's not exactly going on in the United States, at least not under those circumstances, we do have our own version of civil unrest taking place right now. And that's what I want to talk about. We've got so much stuff going on right now, right here in the United States, that it's absolutely to a totally different level. And if you've listened to any of my shows before, then you know what I'm talking about. It has changed from the old way of thinking, which was, as a prepper or a survivalist, we would think of things like we might have a Soviet invasion. We might have a Red Dawn style situation. You can have all these Soviet paratroopers jumping out of planes and taking over our cities. Maybe we would have a nuclear attack and you'd have to survive that. We've always had these different scenarios in mind, but more recently, the more likely situation is that of actual American citizens who've taken to the streets. They're rioting, they're looting, they're damaging people's vehicles, they're impeding traffic, they're shutting down businesses. And that is exactly what's taking place right now. It's civil unrest. And that's the thing that I think we have to be more ready for now. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about how civil unrest starts and how it could make its way to your street, to your neighborhood, to your community. And just like the intro said, civil unrest doesn't just teleport from one area to another. It literally moves, it creeps, it grows. It's like a disease that just starts in one place and then goes on into another area, and it grows with time. So it may start in your CBD, your central business district, your downtown area. And you may think, I'm okay because I live far enough away from downtown, but the way things go now, you have no guarantee that it's going to follow that traditional pattern of staying in downtown. All right, let's talk just a little bit about how these things get started. These things where the civil unrest escalates and turns into something really, really dangerous and violent. And we all know about things like Rodney King, George Floyd. We know those things. So usually an officer-involved shooting is one thing that's almost guaranteed to set off a bunch of protests and things like that. Now, not every protest turns into or escalates into something violent and bad. As a matter of fact, the ability, the right to peacefully assemble and protest is a part of who we are as Americans. It's one of our cornerstone rights. It's very, very important that we protect that right. But what's going on out there right now is that people are escalating these things. They start out as protests, and then before you know it, it turns into rock throwing, maybe Molotov cocktails. And then you've got squad cars on fire. You've got windows of different stores and store fronts, things like that get broken and busted out, and then looting starts. And so that's the kind of situation that we're talking about. That's an awful lot of what's going on right now. And we'll get into some more of this in just a little bit about how I believe that people are subsidizing some of this stuff, and they're actually staging pallets of bricks and rocks and things like that. And sometimes not necessarily starting the civil unrest escalation into violence, but rather providing the opportunity for it to. So an officer-involved shooting is a surefire way to get the protest and the civil unrest started. Also, a political verdict is another way. Just like in the Derek Chauvin with the George Floyd case, we know that depending on how the courts rule in some of these cases, if the verdict doesn't go the way that certain segments of society want it to go, then you know what's going to happen. All of the anti-police, all of the anti-law and order people out there are just looking for something like a wrongful verdict in their mind, the wrong verdict in a case like the Derek Chauvin case, to give them that reason, to be that catalyst to get out there and start doing what they do. It doesn't take a whole lot. Another thing that can happen that can create civil unrest, and we don't see a whole lot of that right now, but we may start seeing more of it, is just economic shock. If the stock market starts changing, if prices and inflation, if things like that get to just the right mixture, you bring all those elements together just right. You let people start needing milk, bread, different things like that. Let them not be able to get money out of an ATM. Let things like that start to happen, and that could absolutely be a catalyst for civil unrest. I think that another thing that is kind of sitting at the core of a lot of this stuff is something that we deal with more today than we probably ever have in history. In fact, I would say absolutely more than we ever have, and that's viral misinformation. Right now with the internet, the way that it is, so much information gets passed so quickly, and it doesn't take anything to get out there and to create any sort of a story, to create headlines, to make things like fake news. Lots of things like clickbait, things like that, and then start an entire generation of people, a whole group of people thinking in some particular way. You can sit there like right now, and I don't want to get too political about any of this stuff, but I watched a video earlier where they were walking around and asking people if they thought that Donald Trump was a sex predator. And of course, there's a certain number of people, all liberals, Democrats, etc., who said, yes, absolutely. They were just for sure, no doubt about it. The next question that this person would ask is, what evidence do you have of that? And then they'd say stuff like the Epstein files. And then they would say, well, specifically what in the Epstein files? And nobody could point to any one specific thing in the Epstein files. They didn't have anything in mind like, oh, you know, the situation where. They didn't have any of that. It was just the fact that they've heard so many times that Trump is guilty and the Epstein files are exactly the smoking gun. They're convinced of that now, and they're not willing to have any other thought about it. It's a done deal. They've made up their mind, and that's just the way it is. Well, that viral misinformation is something that can create unrest. You get some information out there via the internet now, the way that everything spreads around, and let it be misinformation, and that could absolutely cause civil unrest. Now, the thing about that viral misinformation is the fact that you get what's called social media amplification of that. So one thing starts, and it's like that old game, I think they used to call it telephone. One person says something into one person's ear, They say what they think they heard into the next person's ear, and it goes all the way down the line. And usually by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's nothing like how it started. So social media amplification is a part of what's called the contagion effect. That means that something starts and then it grows. And as it grows, it mutates, it changes, it turns into something different than how it started. Now, things like that contagion effect, that social media amplification of the viral misinformation, they're there, but you've got to have something else besides just this information sharing. It doesn't mean a whole lot if I'm sitting here on my computer or on my phone and I see something like that and I think, wow, you know what, I need to get out and do something about this. Me as one solo person, I'm not going to have a whole lot of effect. But when I can get out there and be in a group of people, be in a bit of a mob, then guess what? Power. It starts to grow. Then that social media reflects back that there are actually groups of people out doing this protesting, even though it's not probably going to stay protesting for long. And you influx that with some opportunistic characters, some people who come in who don't really care about whatever the subject at hand is. They don't care about that guilty verdict or not guilty verdict. They don't care about that headline that was just, completely misstated and completely got the actual facts of some situation wrong. They don't care about that. They want to be a part of something that's violent and loud and ugly. They want to come out and break things and burn things. And so when you have this group and you have these opportunistic criminal types coming into it, then you know you've got a much larger problem. So let's talk just a little bit about how all of these things, these elements that come together, typically in the downtown area, how do they actually end up getting to your street or your neighborhood? Because they don't typically start in more rural areas. They don't usually start in the suburbs. They usually do start in like a CBD, a central business district, and then they grow, they spread. You've got the central business district. You've got something maybe centered around a courthouse, maybe around something like ICE headquarters, maybe around a police station, something like that. And then you've got these high visibility intersections, places where people tend to pass through, big points of interest. All of those places become areas that this will start to spread to. You don't see somebody on some back street somewhere typically doing a lot of civil unrest related things, throwing bricks, damaging police cars, holding up signs and having, tear gas canisters fired at them and things like that. It's usually in some big high visibility intersection somewhere, maybe in a retail corridor somewhere like that. It depends on how the city or the town is laid out, but that's exactly what happens. And then eventually what we're believing is completely possible is the spillover then into the more residential areas. You've got those buffer zones. You've got places where you've got your CBD or your downtown area, your primary downtown district. But what happens when all of this starts to spread out and break out past that? We don't have a whole lot of instances of that happening right now. But truly, you have to do exactly what I said. You have to imagine the effects that having these riots spill over into these residential areas, exactly what kind of impact that would create. It's one thing to be located in the middle of a bunch of shops and businesses downtown, and you've got, the concrete jungle, so to speak. But what happens when it comes over into rural America, or whenever it spills over into suburbia? Now you've got kids out riding their bikes. You've got people out, doing jogging and things like that up and down streets. You have cars parked in driveways. It's just a regular, common area that people live and do life in outside of the downtown area. How profound, how awful could it be if all of this stuff were to spill over into an area like that? And so we're going to talk in a minute about how you can harden your target. You can make your home more of a safe place, how you can be prepared for that. We'll get into that coming up. It's going to be enlightening to think about this. But first, you have to understand we're facing something completely different that we've never faced before. All the civil unrest stuff is literally happening right now. Right now, it is staying mostly contained to these downtown areas, but it's just going to be a short amount of time until this is going to start spilling over into some of the more residential areas, and that is when it's going to start affecting people like you and I, and we need to be ready for that. All right, let's talk just a little bit about what this looks like when all of this civil unrest starts to come closer to you, your street, your neighborhood, your community. Now, obviously, you're going to be hearing an awful lot of sirens. There's going to be a lot of police present. You're going to start seeing those police helicopters, the news helicopters. You're going to see more police presence on the streets. You're also going to have a lot of traffic disruptions and things like that. It's going to be a whole lot harder for you to get to school, to pick up your kid or drop your kid off. Harder to get to work. Harder to get to the store. And so it's very imperative that you take a few of these first steps that we're going to talk about in order to be prepared for that situation, for that aspect of this, which is just the disruption, the first phase. This stuff first shows up in your community. And they're your very, very first things that you can be prepared for is always having fuel in your vehicle. Make it a habit to ensure that you've always got fuel and that you're not running just on fumes. If you're one of these people, and I know some of them, I've been one in the past, where you let your tank get all the way down to almost empty, in the event that something like this were to happen, you'd be in an awful lot of trouble because that convenience store, that gas station, you may not be able to go that direction. Those roads may be closed off. Who knows? And if you could get there, they may not actually even be open. I think it's a very, very good habit to get into, to always have ample fuel in your vehicle. It's probably not a terrible idea to have extra fuel storage at home. And of course, there's a right way and a wrong way to go about having, fuel storage at home. There's a lot of videos on that, and I would encourage you to watch those videos and to keep an ample supply of fuel in your garage or a storage shed or something like that. There's an awful lot to be said about stabilizing that fuel so that it can last long term. You can't just go fill up a 5-gallon jug of gas, set it out in your garage and forget about it and think that it's still going to be adequate to fuel your vehicle a year later. So find those videos and watch those things. Another thing that you can do is ensure that you always have a certain amount of cash on hand. If you're not able to get to the bank, if you're not able to get to the bank because of traffic impediment, things that are going on out in the streets, or if you can get there, the bank is not actually open, same thing again as the fuel. You can't withdraw that cash. You can't get your hands on money. So having an adequate amount of cash on hand is a really good idea. And of course, the next thing kind of goes without saying. We're all preppers, right? We all have that mindset. But if you can't get to the store, you can't buy food, you can't hit your local McDonald's drive-thru, then guess what you're going to need? That's right, you're going to need food, extra food at home. So this first phase, this disruption phase, when this stuff first starts coming into your neighborhood, first starts hitting your area, your community, your street maybe, you need to have ample fuel, ample cash, ample food, and you probably ought to have some sort of a plan for being able to almost shelter in place or stay home. But your home is going to be a potential target. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make your home not such a fantastic target. So what happens as these crowds of people, these hordes of protesters, all of the civil unrest starts to roll into your area and get much, much closer to your home? Up and down your street is lots of crimes of opportunity. This is called opportunism. So the disruption happens first. That's when you start to hear the sirens more. You see the helicopters, and you can't, drive out of your neighborhood as easily. But when it starts to actually invade your neighborhood, then you're going to have a whole lot more of the crime of opportunity type stuff taking place. That means property damage. It means vehicle damage, breaking into cars, committing thefts, stealing things from cars, maybe stealing things from your home, or at least attempting to, breaking out windows, trying to break into your home, doing just random property damage. So the one thing you can do to be prepared for this portion, the opportunism aspect of all of this civil unrest moving into your neighborhood, is you can make sure that you have two things: really, really good lighting on the exterior of your property. Now that's not a fail-safe, that's not a for sure, because mob mentality can take over. And even though you're not as easy of a target because your home's well lit, you could still be a target. We're not talking about your average criminal who's gonna choose the darkest home on the street to break into because less chance of them being seen. That may or may not be the case now. But if you have taken steps, if you've put adequate lighting around the exterior of your home, maybe extra lighting that you don't even use on a regular basis, but if something like this were to happen, you flip a few switches and guess what? Your home looks like something on the Las Vegas Strip instead of something in a standard suburban neighborhood. So adequate lighting, and then visibility, maintaining a lot of visibility. If you have a vehicle parked in a certain area around your home and you can't see it, that becomes a soft target. If you can see it, if you've got a line of sight, if you've got cameras, if you've got things like that, then that target turns into something a little more challenging for somebody to damage or do something to. You're going to see someone moving around your vehicle. You're going to see someone moving around that window on that end of your house or whatever, coming onto your property, and you can actually do something about it because you maintained visibility. You had adequate lighting. So that's what you can do to help this opportunism whenever it comes down your street. All right, now the third phase 3 of this entire civil unrest situation coming to your neighborhood, coming to your community, is called spillover. Now, you had the first thing, which was the disruption. You can't get out of your neighborhood. You can't get to the store. You see the helicopters, you see the police presence, things like that. But nothing is actually happening in your neighborhood, like on your street yet. Disruption is your first sign. The second sign is the opportunism. That's when all those ancillary satellite type locations like convenience stores start getting looted. You start having, streets and things like that you can't drive down. You start having all of this stuff creeping ever so close to your actual street. And then the third phase is actually that. It's called spillover. And that's when you start getting these smaller groups within the larger groups of traveling jackwagons, mobsters, people who are looking to cause damage, to do harm, bringing violence literally up and down your street. They travel from street to street. They walk in between the houses. They're damaging things, possibly setting things on fire, because that seems to be something that these idiots like to do, is burn things. And so I don't recommend that you go out and confront these people. Now, obviously, we're all warriors. We all have that warrior mindset. And you think, you know what? Come to my house. Come do something in my front yard, and I'm going to be out there and take care of it. You've got to remember that more than likely, you've got family to also protect. You've got a wife, maybe kids, etc., counting on you. now is probably not the time to go out there and confront a group of 20, 25, 45 individuals who are hell-bent on doing damage and destroying things. Now's the time for you to shelter in place. And I don't mean trembling under the bed. I don't mean hiding in a closet. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we pick and choose our times for confrontation. And right now, in this spillover stage, this third part of all of this civil unrest coming into your neighborhood, now's the time to shelter in place. Now's the time to fall back, to retreat into your home, into your fortress, to protect your family, to protect your wife, your kids, etc., to protect all of those things and not have a confrontation with any of these roaming groups of people who are going from street to street right now. So phase 3, your action item, shelter in place. Fall back into your home and guard your family and your property from within. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is layered home protection. And this is going to be a difficult one because you and I are probably wired the same. We automatically fixate on firearms. That's our go-to. It's what we automatically think. We think somebody's breaking into our house, somebody's damaging our property, and it's an automatic, oh, it's going to suck to be them in about 2 seconds. We all have that firearm fixation. But what I want you to focus on right now, because this is a different way of thinking. This is a whole new area. We're not talking about one thug out there who decides to break into your home to take your jewelry so that he can go get his fix of crack cocaine. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about civil unrest that has now spilled over into your suburban area, into your neighborhood, potentially on your street, and maybe even to your home. And so we've got these different stages that everything's gone through. And right now I want you to think about layered home protection and not fixate on just your firearm. I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for it. There very well is. I'm just saying that what we want to do is layer our home protection. We want to have a strategy like that. So layer 1, and I am going to refer to my notes here just a little bit because there's quite a bit to this and I don't want anything to get missed. So layer 1 is called intelligence, and not this kind of intelligence, not your brain per se, but intelligence like government intelligence, that kind of intelligence. Okay, is there such a thing as government intelligence? That's a different show. So having a police scanner app on your phone, that's so that you can gain knowledge. You can find out what's going on. Now, those scanner apps aren't perfect, and not all radio traffic is out there for us to listen to anymore. Not all communications go over the radio, I should say. A lot of times they have MDCs now. Mobile data computers, whatever they call MDCs, the computers in the cars. And a lot of that police radio traffic that used to go out over the radio is now sent over those MDCs. So you're not going to get all of that, but some of it still goes over the radio. So having a police scanner app, remember we're in layer 1 right now, called intelligence. Local group chats, huge, huge help. Because you know what everybody does when things start happening, when things start shaking loose? They go straight to social media. So if you're in a group, I happen to run a group for my small town, and it's got about 11,000, 12,000 people on it. And I promise you, something like this were to start happening, everybody would be on my little group chat on Facebook talking about it. So if you have access to that, and I know a lot of us hate social media. I know so many people in our circles just refuse to do social media, but believe it or not, from a prepping perspective, think about a situation like this and how critical and how imperative having that knowledge could be. Now then, having verified news sources is another thing. We were already talking about how viral misinformation is a thing. So if you go online and there's a lot of clickbait type stuff, if you're getting unverified news, then you may not respond the way that you should. So have verified news sources. Figure those out now. Find out who they are. I happen to live in an area where tornadoes are very common in the spring and early summer months. And there's an awful lot of weather people out there. Most of them sensationalize stuff. There's a lot of clickbait. They have you thinking that the world's going to end the next afternoon when the storm system comes through. But I've got 2 or 3 weather sources, different individuals who are always very level-headed and very straight. Very, very, very dependable news sources. You need the exact same thing. So scout those out, find out where they're at, and make note of those now. Now, one thing that I used to do is I used to take my little radio, and exactly where I had a station that I knew I could count on for weather, I'd put a little mark on the dial. Because in those moments when it's storming and it's lightning and the power is going out and everybody's going crazy because they think a tornado is coming, it's very easy to just turn that dial to one of those marks and know you're on it. So I suggest that you find your verified news sources and find a way to have those locked in or easily locatable on whatever devices you have. Now, there's going to be a lot of rumors going around and a lot of neighbors talking to neighbors, and you have to avoid what they call rumor spirals. You don't want to get sucked into one of those. It's like a vortex. You get pulled into it, and so-and-so said this, and so-and-so said that, and it's like a micro version of the stuff we were talking about a while ago. You take one little bit of information, and by the time it's passed around 2 or 3 times, it is no longer anything like where it started. So you want to be very, very careful to not get sucked into any of those rumor spirals. All right, layer 2. So that was layer 1, and that's intelligence. Layer 2 is visibility and deterrence. And there's a little overlap here with some of that stuff we've already talked about. Exterior lighting, for example, absolutely critical, but it's a second tier layer for making your home a more challenging, a hard target. Cameras, we mentioned those a while ago. Cameras are absolutely easily accessible now. They're very, very easy to install. They have so much technology now and they don't cost a whole lot. So cameras would be a part of this visibility and deterrence. Visible occupancy signals. Okay, think about that. We're not talking about your typical criminals, like I said, who are breaking into your home to steal your jewelry to go get their crack. We're talking about small groups of individuals who are just out for trouble. They're doing this, they're opportunistic. They've joined these protests with the idea that they're going to go out and do damage. They're going to burn things, they're going to loot, they're going to destroy things because they're basically animals. That's just essentially what this is. That's what they are. So doing things like having visible signals of humans actually occupying your home is not necessarily going to be a deterrent. But you do need to have those signals. You need to have different lights in your home coming on, going off, etc. You need to have some signals to the outside world that, yes, people live here. And this may not be the house that you want to come mess with. This may not be the one that you want to come jack with. Now, motion lights are another thing that can be of great assistance in a situation like this. You're not going to be awake 24/7 and watching constantly. And nighttime obviously is one of your most vulnerable times with regards to your home. And so if you have motion sensors set up with floodlights on them, anytime somebody does walk through that, the person on the outside doesn't know whether you just turn on that light, you've got your carbine or your 45 or whatever else, your slingshot in your hand. They don't know what you're doing. They don't know that a motion sensor didn't just turn that on. That's for them to figure out. but having a motion sensor with lights on it in different areas of your home can create a huge deterrent effect. And that's what we're looking for right now, is visibility and deterrence. Now, here's something that I think is absolutely critical, and that's removing fuel sources from the exterior of your home, from around your property. Think about it. Every time these jackwagons go and light a dumpster on fire, it's because there was stuff in the dumpster that would burn. If there wasn't anything combustible in the dumpster, there'd be no dumpster fire. Every time they do things like that, every time they set something on fire, it's because they had something to set on fire. So what you can do is go around your home and make sure that you don't have things on the exterior of your home that would make easy targets for them to use as fuel when they do exactly what we were talking about, which is burn things. So that's one of the things that I think is a critical part of this visibility and deterrence stuff, is making sure that you're doing what you can to make your home a little less of a target. Don't make it easy for these people. That's what we're working on right now. All right, let's talk about layer 3, which is the physical hardening of your home. Okay, and I'm talking about the security measures here. We've already talked about doing things like lighting and cameras and removing fuel sources and things like that, but let's talk about the actual physical portion of making your home a much more challenging target for these idiots that are roaming around and doing damage, all of the civil unrest that has come to your neighborhood. Now, the first thing that I'd recommend, and this comes from my law enforcement days, is go to every exterior door on your home and pull out the little screws and the strike plates, pull out the little screws and the deadbolts, etc., in the door hinges even. And people will tell you just do the strike plates, but I'm going to say your hinges, everything that has a screw in it. Put a much longer screw in it. Try to go as far as you can and hit a stud. So here's what I'm talking about. On your typical strike plates on your door, that's the metal plate where when the door closes, the little spring-loaded part, it's got a beveled edge on it. It hits that strike plate and then it snaps into place and your door is secured right there, right? When you have those, when you have a deadbolt, you turn the bolt and it goes into a strike plate and into the door jamb. The only thing that is really holding that are those little tiny screws that are going through those strike plates and into that trim. It's not a whole lot. I've kicked in many, many doors in my career in law enforcement, and I was always grateful that nobody had followed the advice that I'm giving you right now. Now, if you'll take some 4-inch, 4.5, 5-inch screws, every situation is going to be different. You'll have to actually look and see how far the stud is in your door jamb, okay? When you have that door casing, you take out those small screws on your strike plates and you put a much longer screw in. It goes through the trim, through where it typically does, and it ends up getting into one of the framing studs on the other side. Now, you do that on the strike plate for your standard door handle type lock, and then do it again if you've got a deadbolt. Do it one more time if you've got another deadbolt, and then do the exact same thing on your hinges. Hinges are typically held on with little 1/2-inch screws that go again into the door jamb itself, into the casing of the door. But there is a stud back there that you can hit. You just need much longer screws. That might be 3.5, it might be 4, 4.5, or 5-inch screws, not typically over 5 inches. And then you screw through that hole into that facing and keep going. And then that screw is ultimately going to land in the stud that is behind that casing. Now you've got a whole lot, much more challenging door to kick in. They may kick at it a few times and then finally decide to give up and go on to the next one. And that's really, really good because you don't want to have to drop somebody when they do get through your door. So reinforcing those strike plates is one thing. Now, if people want to walk up and look into your home, it might be a really good idea for you to have some sort of reflective film. And this is one of those case-by-case bases. You're going to have to decide what's best in the scenario. But it is possible to apply window film to your windows. It can help cut down the cost of the electricity, of course, and it will make it where it's much harder for people on the outside, some of these idiots that are roaming around the neighborhood, from looking in your windows and seeing what they could steal or take from you. So consider window film. Now you've got probably a backyard and you've probably got some sort of a fence around it. That means you've probably got gates. And typically you probably leave those gates unsecured. And we all know it's not very hard to traverse a fence, whether it's a chain link or a wood fence or whatever. But having locks on your gates, again, it's just one more step. And every step you take is like one more vote towards securing your home, making it a hard target. And that's what we want to do. We want to cast as many votes so that we actually win this deal. So yeah, put your longer screws through your strike plates. Do things like put locks in your gates. Consider window film for your windows. Take these things and consider each of them and apply the ones that you believe fit your situation. Now then, you can leave your vehicles out on the street, but if all of this stuff is going on in my community and I've got a garage, if I have space in my garage, guess where my cars are going to go? They're going to be secured in the garage. If they're not out there on the street, they're not getting the windows bashed in, they're not being stolen, things aren't being stolen from them. So if I have space in my garage, part of this physical hardening of your property means put your cars in the garage, if that's possible. Now, if you got a bunch of junk in your garage, well, there's part of your prepping. There's part of your mission. Clean your garage out, because in the event that all of this nonsense starts to happen, you're going to be really glad that you watched this video or listened to this podcast, cleaned out your garage, and had a place to put your car. Now then, the last part of this layer 3 physical hardening is having to do with, like I said, removing the fuel from where these guys can start fires, taking away the opportunities for them to light fires. So you take the fuel things away, you take the trash containers or the leaf bins or the recycle bins, you take all of those things away. But what you should also do is stage fire extinguishers. You should have easy and quick access and know how to use fire extinguishers. Have them staged at different locations. Now, I've got a ranch and I've got fire extinguishers in certain key places. I know where they're at. I check the gauge on them quite often and make sure that they're in the little green zone, which means that they're ready to go. So buying fire extinguishers is not nearly as expensive as it used to be. You can get them reasonably affordably. They last for a long time, and you can stage multiples at different locations around your home. All right, let's talk about layer 4 of hardening your home. And this has to do with the inside of your home. And we've talked about the exterior and all of these different plans, these different layers you can have on the exterior, but you can do things on the interior as well to help with the civil unrest situation when it comes knocking on your door. Now, the first thing is you need to have a place inside your home where everybody knows to meet. In the event the proverbial S hits the F, everybody needs to know exactly where to go. You don't want to have 2 or 3 kids upstairs back in a game room or something, and mama's in the kitchen and daddy's sitting in the living room in his recliner half asleep watching Top Gun. You don't need that. You need to have a rally point. When everything goes down and you need to meet up, everybody needs to know exactly where to meet inside that home. Now, kids are a little different depending on their ages, but you definitely need to come up with a plan to accommodate your kids. It depends on their age and exactly how you can explain all of this to them, because this is not an easy concept for a child to understand. But you need to create a kid's plan, a plan that they can understand. If they're teenagers or preteens, then of course it's going to be a little different. As a matter of fact, you may need to emphasize even more to a preteen or a teen just how serious this is, because they'll take all of this stuff and it's mom and dad. They don't know anything. This is no big deal. Or they may even want to go out and join the protest because that's what happens. But you need to have a separate plan for the kids and explain that to them and drill that into their little heads as you go through these stages, these days, these weeks, these months of all of the civil unrest stuff, at least until we get to a point where it's not so common for this to happen. And God only knows when that time will be. Now, another thing that you probably wouldn't typically think of is pet containment. You've got pets, and obviously we don't want them to be casualties either. We don't want bad things to happen to them, because that can certainly affect your household morale. And yes, that's a thing. Your wife might get really, really upset if her favorite cat didn't come in and all of this chaos is going on outside. Your kids may just be devastated if little Fluffy gets injured in some way. And you've got to have this plan in place for pet containment. That means having some kennels, some storage things, some extra pet food and all of that stuff, but have an idea of when you need to bring those pets in from outside. You've already got a place. You're not just scrambling or letting them run around. And you certainly don't want one of them running out the door when you open the door and hopping into the middle of all of this chaos. Another thing that you probably need to consider throughout all of this for your internal plan is having backup power within the home. And that means a lot of different things. There's a lot of different levels of backup power. That's like me saying you need to have music. Well, there's a lot of different kinds of music. That means instruments, that means stereos, that means what? There's a lot of different ways that you can have backup power. But as simple as to have just basic batteries for your battery-powered things, to having one of those larger power units that holds a certain amount of electricity and can run certain things. It can recharge phones many times over. It can power a computer. It can run a small fan, some appliances. Having one of those power blocks like that, those things are typically anywhere from around $100 and up. But having a $100 version is better than having a $0 one, which means you don't have one. So having backup power is one thing. Now, a first aid kit in your home, absolutely critical. And if you've watched some of my previous videos, you know that I always say there's two different levels of first aid kits. You have your IFAKs, and that's the kind that's going to have it's going to have like a chest seal. It's going to have things made for a gunshot wound. It's going to have tourniquet. It's going to have things like that. It's going to have like real gauze. It's going to have maybe blood stop. It's going to have things like that. But you also need to have what I call a boo-boo kit. It's a funny name, but you know what it means. It means just a basic container of Band-Aids and stuff like that. Because you're not always going to need that real serious gauze. You're not going to need that chest seal. You're not going to need that tourniquet all the time. But you probably are going to need some bandages. You're probably going to need a Band-Aid. You're probably going to need small gauze and things like that. So have both. Have an IFAK and a boo-boo kit and have them inside. Those are all part of layer 4, which is making sure that the internal safety plan, the inside of your home, is just as ready as the exterior. All right, part 5 is what I call community coordination. And what that means is making sure that you've got a lot of coordination with your neighbors, the people who are going to be in this situation right alongside you. And there's different things you can do. I've basically broken this down into 2 parts, like a part A and a part B. And this is where a lot of preppers fail, is you can get all of this stuff right in your home. You've got tons and tons of cans of green beans, and you've got all of your fire starter and your bug out bag. You've got all of these things, But you're not planning for things like this sort of an event. You're not planning for civil unrest. And even when you take the steps that I've already given you, you don't think about now, how am I going to coordinate with my neighbors? So we're going to talk about that just a little bit. Here's the thing, and this is one of the hardest parts, is you need to know your neighbors before the S hits the F. That means that you need to go out there and do something that a lot of us, former military, former law enforcement, whatever, we're not so good at, and that is being sociable, being social, going out there and meeting our neighbors. We're just not that kind of people really anymore. But you need to do that. You need to know who lives around you. You need to know a little bit about their background. And I don't mean go and interrogate them. And certainly don't go knock on their door and say, hey, my name is Ron. I live next door and I'm prepping for whenever civil unrest comes to our neighborhood. Tell me about yourself. Probably not the way to get the information that you need. But it is a good idea to exchange phone numbers. That way you can text, that way you can call, possibly email. It's not going to hurt to have that. I doubt that you're going to sit down and say, here's an email. I noticed that we've got people in our neighborhood who are burning things. You're not going to do that. But having the email is probably good because you're going to want to do some coordinating ahead of time. And all of that coordinating doesn't happen over text and probably not phone calls. So get that email whenever you get that phone number. Now you need to know who in your community are veterans. And you know exactly why you need to know who the veterans are. Because they've had some level of formalized training. Weapons training, possibly other specialties. You need to know who your veterans are. You need to know who your medical people are. Who's a nurse? Who's been a nurse? Who's worked as a medic in the military? Who's got any sort of medical training whatsoever? You need to know who they are. And then tradesmen would be the last thing, because you've got to have some knowledge of different skills in the event that you do need to pull together as a community. Who can build things? Who can put together protection with wood and steel? Who can weld? Who knows how to do things like that? So who are your craftsmen? Hopefully it never gets to that point. If it does, we're all in an awful lot of trouble, but you will have taken the extra steps and said, all right, I know who my former veterans are, who my veterans are. I know who my former law enforcement is in the neighborhood, if there are any. I know who my medical people are, my nurses, etc. And I know who all my tradesmen are. I know these guys that know how to do good framing. These guys do some welding. And this guy down the street over here, he happens to have this skill set. Put all of that stuff together. Now that's your, like I said, I have an A and a B. That's your A portion of the community coordination. The B portion is the unified messaging. And this is a little different. You've got to be very, very careful with this. You've got to be very clear and concise. One of the things that I learned in law enforcement above all else is to communicate clearly. Now, I don't always do that, and you've already seen me kind of stumble around a little bit on this video because I'm real. I'm not doing a script. I do have some notes, but I'm not going to sit here and just kind of read a script to you. This isn't that kind of a presentation. This is legit stuff. And so you need to be legit when you communicate with your neighbors, with your family, with other people, including law enforcement and everyone else. So making very direct statements like, we're staying home. That's critical. That says everything. If you're truly staying in, that's what you need. We're watching. Very, very basic and direct dialogue. What you don't want to do is say stuff like, oh, we're going hunting. That doesn't really help a whole lot. Or, come on, we're going to form up a militia. That's not going to help. You need very specific and direct messaging anytime you're communicating. And again, optics matter in all of this stuff. You don't know how these things are going to play out. You don't know what's going to happen later on down the road. You don't know anything about how any of your communications might be taken later on. They might even end up doing something like going to a courtroom or something like that. So very clear and concise communications is not only good for the people who are communicating, but it's also good to kind of see what in the event that things kind of go south on down the road. Now, I said I had an A and a B, but I want to add one more section to this. I want to add something else to this, and that's about community patrols. Okay? When you've got stuff like this going on, you've got roving bands of bad guys and jackwagons out there doing all kinds of not so great stuff. There is a possibility that having our own version, meaning the preppers and the survivalist version of patrols, could be a good idea. And I say could be, not is. Okay? There's legal ramifications for doing things like that. Of course, there's legal ramifications for going out and burning people's houses down too. But we already know that. What we want to do is stay on the right side of the law as we move forward. Okay? You've got to have it absolutely coordinated. You can't have, 2 or 3 different roaming groups of the good guys out there without some coordination between the different groups as they're out there doing these neighborhood patrols. So coordination is a huge part of it. Maintaining a certain type of calmness is another critical part of this. If you think about it, the other side of this situation is chaotic. They're out of control. They're aggressive. They're emotional. And again, from law enforcement, when you lose your control of your emotions, you generally lose control of the situation. So staying calm and trying not to escalate things. So you've got a group, there's another group, and it's not going to be like this big gang fight out there. At least it should not be. That's not the goal of it. So that's why I say having like a group of people doing patrol from your community, from your neighborhood, like a citizens patrol, maybe it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Not always is it a great idea. In a few ways, presence, like just the appearance, being there, can be a deterrent. But if you are aggressive or insightful, not insightful in a good way, like if you're inciting things, if you're propagating problems, if you're growing little bits of trouble into bigger bits of trouble, then that means the group is ineffective and doesn't have the correct purpose, not the correct mission. And in that case, it's a terrible idea. All right, part 6 of what I want to talk about is the legal and moral discipline you need when the civil unrest nonsense comes to your neighborhood. And yes, you do need that. As I was saying earlier, a lot of us get very weapon focused, very, set up with the idea that we're going to defend our home at all costs. And that is a very, very, very honorable thing. But you have to think about this. Usually these events, these civil unrest situations, they can last anywhere from just a few hours to days. Usually they don't go on month over month. So if you have a situation that does actually spill over and come into your community, into your neighborhood, and you go out there and take some sort of action that's then going to tie you up in court, potentially get you in prison for the rest of your life, then I'm not real sure that you did as much good as you should have, because you took yourself away from your family. You are no longer able to protect them moving forward. You're locked up somewhere in a penitentiary for something that you did during the last round of civil unrest. So I think it's critical that we maintain a certain level of legal and moral discipline. That means knowing what the use of force laws are, things that have to do with concealed carry or when it's okay to actually utilize a firearm in a situation. There's things that are covered like self-defense and things like that, but you've got to be sure that you fully understand what the definition of self-defense is in your state, in your locality. You don't want to be the one that becomes prosecuted for making the wrong choice in one of these situations. You've got to remember that cameras are literally everywhere now. Even the Ring doorbells, they're so responsible for catching things now, like not only like porch pirates and things like that, but they're finding lost dogs. They're catching suspects as they do different things in these communities and neighborhoods. They're just recording an awful lot. So you have to think that when you're out there doing this civil unrest situation, when you're dealing with that, the cameras are literally everywhere. And of course, in all cases, we all have one of these things now. That means that we all carry a video camera around with us, a recording device at almost all times. Now, social media can take whatever your situation is and however you handle it, and they can weaponize that against you. And we can think about different situations where we have seen individuals at these protests who were armed and who unfortunately had to discharge their weapons, and then they become kind of the poster child by the opposite side, by typically the liberal left, to go anti-gun, to go anti, that entire deal where somebody has a weapon, they have to use it, and then it becomes, oh, that was a cold-blooded murder. You didn't have a right just because the person was punching you in the head. You didn't have the right to shoot them. And it becomes a big social media nightmare. So you have to think about that. You don't want to win the small fight. Okay? That means just you've got a situation unfolding right in front of you. It's not critical, but it's just a situation. You don't want to win that one, but lose the fight for your freedom for the rest of your life by being locked up. You're not helping your family. You're not helping yourself. And that's certainly not something that we want to do. All right, now for part 7, I want to just go over a few things that I think you should probably never do in a situation like this. And again, I've got my notes. I think all of this stuff is so critical. I typically never have notes, but I think this stuff is so critically important. I don't want to miss anything. So you may notice from time to time I'm kind of glancing down at my notes, and that's so that I ensure that you get all of this information. And what not to do is just as critical as all of the things that I've suggested that you do. And the first thing is, if somebody loots something, if somebody steals something from you or from a neighbor, from your vehicle, I don't think you should ever chase them. I don't think there's ever going to be a good case where you chased a looter and did something to them as you chased them, primarily shooting them. Let's just, say it like it is. I don't think anything good can come of that. You may just, in fact, get shot, or the mob may just take you out because you're chasing one of the looters. If somebody takes a material item, they've taken, some piece of jewelry or a television or something like that, let them have it. Let them go. You stay, you protect your family, you protect your home to the best of your ability moving forward from that. Don't put yourself in a bad situation where you're, 5-10 houses down the street. You're surrounded by an awful lot of people who are engaging in civil unrest and leaving your home exposed and your family unsafe right up the street. That's not a good idea. So I think chasing looters would be a definite don't do. Another thing is don't stand in the street and posture. That means saber rattling. That means standing out in the street and threatening. The way that fights go down these days is just so absolutely ridiculous. It's people are begging each other to engage in fights. You see that all the time. There's tons of videos on that. This is just a scaled up version of that. You don't need to be out in the middle of the street, in your front yard, on your lawn, whatever, and posturing and having debate and arguments with the people who are doing this civil unrest stuff. You have one mission, and that is to protect yourself, your family, and then your property. And that does not at any point, way, shape, form, or fashion involve you standing out your front yard, daring somebody to engage in either a physical confrontation or a gunfight with you. So I would say that is a definite do not do. Another one is don't broadcast your plans online. You may have seen that these protesters are starting to get really, really good with the technology. They're running license plates of people that they believe are ICE agents. They're doing all kinds of things like that now. So one thing I would not do is go out on social media and say, here's what I'm doing. Here's our plans. This is what we're up to. Don't show your cards, especially on social media. Save that for when you're face-to-face with people or when you have somebody's email address that you trust or whatever, then you can start sharing that information. But don't go put it on Facebook, and certainly don't go make a TikTok or something like that about it. That would just absolutely, not only would that be a bad idea, that would just be stupid. All right, and don't escalate situations. You have to remember that escalating something is never going to be in your best interest. And I know this as a police officer. If you can de-escalate a situation 99.9% of the time, everybody is better off. Okay? There's a time to escalate situations, but that's very, very rarely, and it doesn't happen that often. Like, it's not frequent in these situations at all. De-escalation is definitely the better way to go. And the last thing is, when all of this stuff is going down, if you haven't done your proper prepping, if you don't have the things that you need, when this has reached this point, when you actually have the spillover, the phase 3 spillover, when people are in your neighborhood, when you have small groups of people moving from street to street, that is not the time to go out and start panic shopping, panic buying of things. You're past that point by then. So you don't need to rush out and start grabbing all of the milk, bread, and toilet paper. Hopefully, you've already got that taken care of. All right, the last segment of this before I close everything out that I want to talk about is mindset. And if you've watched any of my videos or ever been to any of my training, you know that I am huge on mindset. I think mindset is literally the key to success in nearly everything. And so when you're in one of these situations where you've got civil unrest that's literally moved its way into your neighborhood, your mindset is going to be your greatest weapon, your greatest asset, better than anything else that you can have. And here's what I'm talking about. First of all, you've got to have a sense of mission and purpose. And you can't be taken off of that mission or away from that purpose. And you define your mission. You know what your mission is. If it's protect your family, protect yourself, if it's to move your family to safety, whatever that mission is, and it may change as you go. But you've got a mission, and you've got to have a mindset that is, I will succeed at this mission. My mission every day in law enforcement was, I'm going to come home tonight. I'm going to make it safely home. That means that every single time I engaged with someone on the side of the road in a traffic stop, every single time I went to a call of some sort of a disturbance or whatever it might have been, every single time I had to drive my car at a high speed, everything I did on every shift, the mission was the same: to get home safely at night. And you'll have to define your mission in these circumstances and make sure that you've got the mindset to accomplish that mission. Like at all costs, you're going to accomplish that mission. There is no other option. It requires an awful lot of discipline and an awful lot of, focus. Making sure that what you say is what you mean, and you mean what you say. And that includes talking to yourself. When you mentally say, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, then you do it. Failure is just literally not on the list of options. When you have that kind of mindset, you can do nearly anything. I don't mean you can walk outside and say, well, I'm going to fly. I've got that mindset and then fly. Not that. But if you decide you're going to lose weight, nothing will stop you. If you decide you're going to get a certain job promotion, you'll get it. If you decide you're keeping your family safe in this situation, you're keeping them safe. That's the kind of mindset that I'm talking about. Now, you have to remember that the things that work against your mindset in a situation like this are simply some of those things that we've already talked about. The social media aspect of it, making it seem like it's way worse than it actually is. A lot of sensationalizing of the information, making it seem like things are way more out of control than they actually are. The media loves to magnify chaos, and you can't sit there and be taken off point by all of that kind of stuff. It's just exactly like when I was talking about the weathermen a while ago. I was talking about I live in an area where tornadoes happen in the spring and early summer. If you have the mission to survive, and so you're taking the necessary steps, you've got your plan in place for where you're going to shelter if a tornado does come, you've got your lighting, your flashlights, your lanterns, your whatever. You've got all of those things. You've got your situations worked out already in advance. But then you start listening to the social media and they're talking about how devastating it's going to be, this bad, and the chances are this great that this is going to happen, and they could be a category 5, it's just going to be awful. You get taken off your focus, and maybe your mindset changes, and that's not what we want. That's when panic is allowed to come in, etc. You stay on focus, you don't listen to the nonsense, and you fall back on your systems, the things that you've put into place. You already have plans. That's what this whole video is about, is getting you to start thinking about how you can deal with the civil unrest stuff, all the way from hardening the outside of your home to the inside, to what you do in the event that these roving gangs of miscreants start, going through your neighborhood, to having all of your plans in place, and so on and so forth, and coming ultimately to the point of mindset. You've got to develop that mindset, and it's got to be a very strong and solid mindset. So I've got a lot of videos, I've got a lot of materials out there specifically on mindset, and I'll try to link to those in this. If you're actually watching this on video, then you'll be able to find a link to one of my videos about mindset. But study that, learn about it, learn from people who have been in the military and in bad situations. Read books by law enforcement officers who have been in situations like that. I don't know necessarily, and I'm just going to say this because I think a lot of people get confused. There's a big difference in having a Tony Robbins mindset for gaining wealth and happiness and the kind of mindset I'm talking about right now. Mine is more of a survival-based mindset. There's nothing wrong with the other. There's a time and a place for all of it. And you don't need to live your life 100% with a survival mindset, constantly expecting something to happen at the next turn. But you do need to have this. It's just like you need to have your weapon systems in place. You need to have your training in place, etc., in the event that you need those as well. But you don't walk around kicking in the air and doing your martial arts skills and stuff like that. And you certainly don't walk around with your gun in your hand. but you need to know how to access those things, including your mindset when you need them. All right, guys, before I wrap this entire thing up, I just want to say thank you so much for sticking with us through this entire video. There's quite a bit to it, or podcast, however you're getting this information. And I'd like to welcome you to go to our website, which is tacticalredneck.com. And I'll tell you what, we've got this entire ecosphere that we're trying to build. At one time, you may already know this, we were a very large tactical supply company. And we got shut down by cancel culture over a t-shirt. Yep, it really happened. We lost everything over a t-shirt. And we're in the process of building back. We don't want to be a giant tactical supply company again, but we do want to share our knowledge with people like you. And what I'd ask for in return is a thumbs up on this video. Share it if you think there's other people who would like it. You can save it to a playlist on your YouTube channel. You can send it to a friend or something like that. But making a comment down below and certainly subscribing to the channel makes a huge and significant difference. And so let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Here's what I want to say. When you find yourself in one of these situations, there's just certain key characteristics that are going to help you survive and get through the civil unrest nonsense when it comes to your front yard. And the first thing that you've got to do is you've just got to be very observant. In all of this, all the time, being observant. See what's going on. Pay attention when you start seeing more helicopters, hearing them, hearing more sirens in the distance. When you start seeing signs that something is about to spill over into your neighborhood, that is going to give you that very, very first advantage, and it's going to help you throughout this process as you go through each of these stages. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to absolutely be disciplined. There's no time for emotional nonsense. There's no time to get off mission. There's no time to let your mindset get out from under you. You've got to keep everything in order, and that means personal discipline. You've got to be responsible, because no matter what, through all of this stuff, like I said, there is an after to this. And if you don't perform properly in the during, then that after is going to come back and bite you in the ass. And that's not going to be okay. If you're locked up somewhere because you made a bad choice, or you're out beating your chest in the front yard because some thuggy little thin guy with a mask on was mouthing off to you, squirting you with a squirt gun filled with some sort of pepper spray or some nonsense like that, all the things that they do, so you decided to take him out, that's not okay. So you've got to be very responsible as you go through this stuff. And I guess the last thing, the thing that's going to serve you the best through all of this, is keeping that mindset and staying calm in the middle of all of the stress and the chaos. When you lose that emotional control, then you are no longer an asset to your family or to your situation, and you certainly cannot accomplish your mission. Anyways, guys, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you again. Like I said, we appreciate you. We respect you very, very much, and we appreciate the fact that you've given some of your valuable time to tuning in to this episode of the Tactical Redneck Podcast. And guys, we look forward to the next time that we get to come to you on another podcast episode or on another video. And until then, stay safe out there, and God bless.